okay, he said so, the rabbi said it, so it must be true, right? Now we're like, well, Professor Doctor from Harvard University said so, must be true. Same mechanism, right? It's not the rabbi, now it's this Professor Doctor from Harvard. Do the same, okay? In both cases it's wrong. The Buddha said so, therefore it's right. That's wrong. That's not a good reason. If the Buddha or the rabbi or the scientist gives good reason for it, if then based on that reasoning I believe it because it makes sense, that's not blind faith. That is faith, believing in something, but it's not blind faith. That's better. In Buddhism, faith exists. Blind faith, not a good idea. Don't believe it just because someone tells you. It has to make sense, right? When you say you were born on 17th of August, do you believe your parents? It's not blind faith. It makes sense. Why would they lie to you? Although there are people who actually, I've heard that. I've been told that there was someone in the US, they told me that her parents changed her birthday because it was their wedding day and that was not convenient to have the wedding day and the birthday, so they kind of changed it. So years later she found, well, she was actually born a day later or something, or very, very early, I forget. So kind of funny. So it's not even sure, but who cares we were born on that day or not. Anyway, Tibetans make up their birthday all the time. They take off a few years out of convenience anyway, so they're all a few years younger than they actually are. In fact, some of my teachers, they were 33 for 10 years. One of my teachers, he was 33 for 10 years. And one day I said, well, Gellert, but it's been like a few years now. So he suddenly jumped to 39. Then he was 39 for many years. So anyway, the point is that faith, we have faith in a lot of things, but it should be faith based on reasoning. And faith in Buddhism is temporary. Very important, it's temporary. Faith it's very important until you come to a first-hand understanding. It's not, for some time it's okay, but in Buddhism you work towards gaining an understanding. But it can be beneficial to believe in something that makes sense if it moves you in the right direction. But please don't forget, it has to be temporary. It can't be faith forever, because you don't get anywhere if you don't come to a first-hand understanding about the mind, about karma, etc. So the idea is that let's assume karma exists. Let's assume it exists. If I always believe in it, it's not enough. I need to be convinced and at some point understanding. And once I understand it, I really act accordingly. To be convinced that the I that I perceive doesn't exist. I'm not saying I don't exist, but the way I perceive of myself, the I that I perceive doesn't exist. Unless I really understand that, my self-grasping will never go. It's always more powerful. So understanding is a must. But until you get there, it's acceptable to have faith in it if it's beneficial. And faith based on reasoning. So that's a very important aspect. I don't know about Judaism, but in Christianity, I was raised, be faithful. Just have faith. Faith is the greatest virtue, and it doesn't make sense. Still you have to believe, then you're a good Christian. And Buddhism is like, no, it's different. It's just different. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but for some, one works better for others than for others. So it's a matter of preference. Okay, all right. Having said that, so having understood that faith is supposed to be temporary, a valid cognizer, which basically means a sense consciousness or a mental consciousness that knows its object incontrovertibly. So it's valid from the point of view of saying it's in accordance with reality. Of course, you can only know something that exists. You can't know something that doesn't exist. You can't know that this is a snake, because it isn't. Okay? So, therefore, you can know that this is a stick, because that's what it is. It's called a stick. We've agreed on it. So, conventionally, it is a stick. Therefore, there can be a valid mind that is valid, it's in accordance with reality, that cognizes or realizes its object. Okay? So this, it's called pramana in Sanskrit or tsema in Tibetan, and valid cognizer it's not a literal translation, but it works. Valid works, cognizer works. All right. Okay. So this is explained here. So there are valid cognizers, which means a mind that knows its object, that realizes its object, and then those that don't realize their objects, they're non-valid cognizers. So They can be wrong consciousnesses, they can be minds that just believe something. Anything that doesn't realize its object but is a mind is called a non-valid cognizer. So that's just one of the divisions, one of the categories of the mind that is considered to be important. All right. Now, here you have the example of a mind that doesn't realize its object. So, okay, what they say in the Madhyamika Prasangika, in the high school, they say that every mind realizes something. It's not necessarily a valid cognizer. It's only a valid cognizer if it realizes its main object. But every mind realizes something, knows something. What does it know? The appearance of the object. You're aware that a table appears. That you're aware of. So we always know that something is appearing to us. Okay? So even if it's a wrong consciousness, for instance, if this appears to be a snake, your mind knows that this appears as a snake. So it always knows something. This is quite unique to the Prasangika school. So when you have a generic image, you know what appears to you. When I ask you, the car appears to your mind, you're aware of the appearance of the car. How exactly that appears, that may be difficult to understand, but you're aware that there's something appearing. The lowest philosophical schools don't assert that, but it kind of makes sense. You are aware, you know that you perceive something. That mind knows. But that mind, if it's just a split second, later on you may not remember, or another mind may not be aware of you knowing that, which accounts for the fact that later on we can't even mention it, we don't even know about it, because we've forgotten. But that is like, there's this assumption that there's a person that knows what the mind is doing. But of course when we say, I know what my mind is doing, the I that knows is just another mind. It's just another mind. So we label I on the basis of the mind that is aware of another mind. And the mind that is aware of the other mind is called introspection. Right? Introspection. Or sometimes people call it meta-awareness, but I don't know if that's a good translation. Pardon? Huh?
In physics, meta.
Yeah, in physics, but there's a new word called meta-awareness, and now some people use that word to describe introspection, but I prefer introspection. So there's an awareness that is aware of another awareness. And actually, there are just these awarenesses that come one after the other arising, and because they arise quick enough, and in with a certain consistency, that we have a sense there's actually a person there that experiences those. But that which experiences are just different minds. So every experience we have, we label the I experiences it, but there's no separate I that actually controls the mind, or a separate I that decides, now I will meditate. It's just a mind deciding to meditate. And being responsible for us to sit down and starting to meditate. And we can say conventionally, we can label I on any part of the mind or body. So when the mind thinks I should meditate, I label I'm thinking I'm meditating. But there's no I that is deciding to meditate besides the mind that does so. That I can't be found. It's because the mind decides to do so, so we say I do. Okay? So they're just different awarenesses, and they're so working so well with each other. You don't need an I. You don't need an I. Just as in your brain, there's no control center, right? A control center that controls all the other aspects. You don't need it. Your brain does it really well, working with each other, so there's no control center. Same with the I. There's no controlling mind. They're just different awarenesses, and we label I based on these different awarenesses. That's it. Right? So the I exists, but just by way of being labeled on different parts of the person. So my hand writes, I label, I write. My legs walk, so I label, I walk. My mind meditates, I label, I meditate. That's it. Nothing more. You don't need anything more. Right? And if you understand that, and you understand that's the only I that exists, you can't be attached. Because you're not attached to that. We are attached to a separate I that not only does my mind meditate, there's also some I that meditates. Not only are my legs walking, no, there's a separate I. And that I is very precious. We exaggerate. We kind of add a little bit more than is actually there. We kind of, so instead of just being satisfied with labeling I on the basis of meditating mind, on the basis of a handwriting, we create a little bit like like a separate I that does all that the mind and body does, but it's more than that. And because it's over here and you are over there, it's close to me and it's more precious than you are. So once you have that, once you add more to what the I actually is, you're exaggerating, you're adding more, then you can't help it. You add more of importance, more of a value, and then you become attached to it, and all our actions become governed by that attachment to the I, considering myself to be more important. So that's the real perpetrator. Not understanding that things are just labeled, that we label I on mind and body, and that's why I do it. There's no other I. So very important idea. Okay? Yes, Barbara.
What would be the explanation of how we don't call ourselves by the name that we were called?
Mm-hmm.
Only other people call us
Vada.
like in a special name.
Yes, okay.
And I call myself I.
Yes.
Is there a certain explanation of
Why that is the case? I think in some cultures there is no word for I, I've been told. There are cultures where the word I is not used. You just refer to yourself, I guess, by your name. Mother, or Kelsang Momo doesn't want such and such. And maybe it's actually beneficial. Because I've heard, His Holiness has mentioned it, the Dalai Lama has mentioned it, he says that psychiatrists have found, or psychologists have found that people who use the word I, me and mine more often than others have more of a problem with heart disease. Right? It's like I, so blood pressure goes up, etc. And so whatever other mechanics, the more self-grasping we have, the worse it is for our body, for our blood pressure, etc. And it can have an effect on the. So if you use the word more often, it's probably a reflection of strong self-grasping. But not necessarily. The Dalai Lama still says I. So I don't think the Dalai Lama has strong self-grasping, if at all. I don't know.
So
but
would it be another aspect of I, or will it just be a name of...
Well, in the end, I think as long as we have self-grasping, you know, whether you call it I or you call it Kelsang we probably still have that sense. But it could be effective, have a slight effect if you referred to yourself as Kelsang maybe. But then it becomes very confusing. So better to say I. Yeah, so I don't know. Right? But it's also important to understand that I is relative. But it doesn't feel that way. What is the absolute I? This. You're not I, you're other. But of course it's just relative. It's relative. I'm just relative. From my perspective, this is I, but from your perspective, I'm other. So it's part of understanding that I'm the only person who calls himself I. 7 billion people in this world don't refer to me as I. Right? It's actually, I'm outnumbered totally. So there's no reason for me to think I, because I'm the only person calling that itself I. Okay? All right. Yes.
I'm still confused a little bit about the hierarchy of the mental functions, considering the observer and what you said before, like who monitors the attention.
Who's in charge?
If I'm meditating, so I choose to make this effort to go to...
Yeah, this is a little hard to understand, but it's actually just a type of awareness that in that moment, because of tendencies and imprints, etc., that in that moment decides to meditate. There's no separate I that makes that decision. It's hard to believe.
So there's no self-choice,
Well, there's no separate self.
Free choice. Free, no.
There's no separate I that has a choice because there's no separate I. Yeah, that's true. But there's still free will. I'm not going to go into free will. There's still a relative free will. Is there independence? Is there independence? No. Is there independent Israel? Yeah, relatively. There's relative free will. If I have the choice to leave this room, right? Let's say you put me in chains and I can't leave the room. In relation to that, I don't have a free will to leave this room. You're not in chains. You have, in relation to the fact that you can get up and leave, in that case you have free will. So in relation to that, but do you have totally independent free will, like being totally independent of anything making a decision? Impossible. So there's only a relative free will. But then everything exists relatively, so what's the big deal? Right? There's relatively short and relatively long. There's relative objectivity and relative table and a relative woman and a relative man. Everything exists relatively, so big deal. Time is relative. Everything is relative. So free will is also relative. There's no absolute free will and there's no absolute independence.
Can I just have a clarification
Yeah.
about introspection?
Mm-hmm.
Say during meditation,
Mm-hmm.
so introspection is consciousness that is consequent to the previous moment of consciousness. It's not simultaneous.
Ah,
you cannot
okay.
have simultaneous consciousnesses, right?
That's a little bit complicated. There's a lot of debate on that. When you say introspection, can you, while you meditate, at the same time have another mind that watches the mind that is meditating? Some explanation seems to suggest that it's possible, but from everything I learned about the mind, it will be like the moment, in the same way as when your eye consciousness perceives its object, in that moment the other sense awarenesses don't perceive their object. Similarly, when your eye consciousness knows its object, your mental consciousness doesn't know its object. So at one time you only have one awareness that can know its object. So that being the case, then when you are fully aware of your object with one mind, in that moment introspection,
Not possible.
no. But then a second later it sets in, and because it's still so fresh, oh, that's what I was thinking. That's not okay. So you go back and adjust it. Right? Oh, I'm being angry here. Wait a minute. So the moment you think I'm angry, you can't be angry in that moment. You're too busy with being aware of being angry. So then you go back to being angry. Okay? All right, wait, I'm not done yet. Angry again. And then, wait a minute, but actually I don't want to be angry. So it's this battle between the battle between those two awarenesses, right? It's those two. And you don't need an I to be involved. They don't need that. The two minds just do their thing. Maybe a little bit scary. It sounds scary first, right? You think, oh gosh, there's no I, oh my God. But actually, all day long it's about I. We better check that I is there. It better be there. We've worked so hard until now, it better be there. So it's a bit like, I want it to be there because I worked so hard for it. But actually it's a huge relief once it's really understood. Okay, anyway. All right. So going back, so I know I haven't done meditation. I know it's supposed to be part of it, and I know you want it, and I'll bring it in. We still have time this evening. We have some question and answer, so we can do the meditation. In this particular case, there are certain topics it's very helpful to meditate in between. In fact, without it, it's difficult. But here it's like without the basis, without establishing that and clarifying a few points, I don't think the meditation is that helpful, right? So let's go back therefore. So recognizers are mind that realize their objects, and as I said, every mind has an aspect of actually realizing at least the appearance, which is explained in here. Then there are different types of recognizers explained. So you have two types basically. You have a direct recognizer and you have an inferential direct recognizer. Direct just means you directly know your object. It's not conceptual. So you realize your object. Okay, so with an eye consciousness and ear consciousness, you know the object. That's a direct perception. Or you have a meditative mind that now independence on meditation, you directly experience that there's no self. No self means a specific self doesn't exist. No, I'm not talking about the conventional self, but an intrinsic separate self that doesn't exist. You have a direct experience of that. But then there are also inferential valid cognizers, which is describing how you come to an understanding on the basis of reasoning. So you have you think about something, you analyze it, and you understand logical reasoning, or based on a logical reason, you can come to understand that something is this, that, or the other. Okay, so based on the fact that there's smoke, you can understand that there must be a fire. Wood smoke indicates that there's, so you can infer that there's a wood fire based on the presence of wood smoke. Okay, you can infer on the basis of certain external signs that something is this, that, and the other. Sometimes correctly, sometimes you don't infer correctly, of course. Just because someone is grumpy, you assume the person's not happy. That's not a correct reason. There are certain reasons that can give us insight into something that is actually hidden to us. All right. So therefore, you have valid cognizers, like minds that know their objects, which arise from meditation, which arise from just because it's easy to know it. So I want to know there's a book on the table here. All I need to do is look at it. Now I know there's a book here. So that's a direct valid cognizer, a sense direct cognizer. If I want to know the emptiness of this book, I can meditate, come to realize its emptiness, and through continuous meditation, shamatha, vipassana, union of the two together, then I can realize directly, even with my eyes closed, I can, with a mental consciousness, realize the lack of inherent existence of this object. But an example of an inferential cognizer, before I can have that direct perception, a mental direct perception of the actual nature of this object, the lack of inherent existence, well, I can do that by way of applying reasoning, right? It doesn't make sense. How could it exist if it existed inherently, etc.? So based on that, I can come to an inferential understanding. All right, so this is what is explained on page 33. And then there's some examples of non-valid cognizers. So valid just means, like I said, you realize the object is realized, and then there's some non-valid cognizers. So an awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. That's a non-valid cognizer. It doesn't cognize anything. What it does is, it's the object appears, but it's not verified, as used the word before. So we had lots of examples before. Don't need to mention those again. All right. And they're wrong consciousnesses. They don't know their object. They can't know. So they're non-valid cognizers. Doubting consciousnesses. So here we mention doubt. Why do I mention doubt? Is doubt a wrong consciousness?
It could be.
It could be, but not necessarily. Right? It could be if I think, I don't know, for instance, whether this table is impermanent or not. It probably is not impermanent. That is a wrong consciousness. Probably not. But why is it a doubting mind? Not because of its object existing or not existing, right? It's got nothing to do with, I think that probably it's permanent. So the object is permanent, a permanent table, which doesn't exist. But why is it, so it is a wrong consciousness, but what makes it doubt? Here's to do with how I get at the object. It's not decided. Maybe like this, maybe like that. So I'm not decisively apprehending it to be this, that, and the other. Okay? So it's just another type of mind, which can be very helpful and which can be very harmful. A wrong consciousness is always harmful. But a doubting consciousness can be beneficial and it can be harmful. When is it beneficial? Yeah, when you want to know more because you have doubts. So your doubt may inspire you to learn more. When is it harmful?
When you close up.
Pardon?
When you close up and you don't.
When you always doubt everything. You never come to any decision. Always, right? The Tibetans have a saying. Do you know the Tibetan saying about doubt? You cannot stitch with a two-headed needle. Right? If your needle has two heads, You can never stitch. You cannot get through. So if you're always like, oh, maybe it's like that, or maybe I should meditate, but maybe not. You're not going to sit down to meditate. Oh, maybe the self exists, but maybe not. If you're always doubting, and it can become a habit. You never reach some kind of decision, so you never sit down to do what's necessary. So it can be beneficial, it can be harmful. So that's why it's good to mention it. And then there's also a correctly assuming consciousness. Like I said earlier on, a lot of the minds we have, we just correctly assume. Of course, we wrongly assume too. Wrongly assumption is just a wrong consciousness. But here, correctly assuming consciousness is mentioned because it's very helpful. Let's assume there's past and future lives. If they really exist, and I assume they do, even though I haven't known yet, I can already act accordingly, and it can be a very good preparation for a next life. Or if I correctly assume that the self doesn't exist the way it appears, then I can already help to reduce my self-centeredness. Because the mind that is attached and is self-centered grasps at the non-existing self, not at the existing self. You cannot be attached to the existing self. Can't be. Because it's always exaggerating what's actually there. So the attachment automatically exaggerates what's there. If you have no longer any exaggeration, if you no longer exaggerate, you can't have attachment. That's why when you remove the misperception, you can't have attachment, because your mind no longer exaggerates. Okay? So you can only have attachment when you exaggerate, and you can only exaggerate when there's attachment. Alright. Okay. Now those are the different types of mind, and of course you learn more about them in detail, but they're not that difficult to understand. So like I said, I'm just giving you the basis, and once you have that, then you can take it further if you choose to do so. Okay? And we haven't come to the mental factors yet. I've left them towards the end. The afflictions. I haven't said that much about afflictive emotions yet, and that's why I'm racing through these parts. I don't think they're that important for our purpose here. This is why I'm racing a little bit. Oops, I have 1 minute left. Okay. So, valid cognizers, non-valid cognizers. Okay, and then there are the non-valid ones. They're all described here, correctly assuming. Alright, so now we're at the process of cultivating a direct realization. Okay, so maybe I'll go over those tomorrow. But basically, I want to continue with page 40. Really important. Minds and mental factors. Mind and mental factors. So that's another category of mind, and that's really important, and is often not mentioned in great detail, and I think it's so important to understand all the different types of awareness now. There are 51 of them, and oftentimes it's just a sentence or two that describes them, but when you study Lordic, they're usually not studied to the same degree as the other ones. So I want to at least spend the day tomorrow, to go through the different mental factors, just to get a fuller sense of what awarenesses they are, and spend more time with the afflictions. And then lastly, the last category after mind and mental factors is coarse and subtle minds, and say a little bit about that. So I apologize, it's just a short course, and I cannot get you to walk away with a good understanding of Nordic. If you give me 2 months, then I'm more. But 2 days, it's just not possible. But like I said, I hope it gives you a good foundation, and I'll mention a few books tomorrow that if you want to take it further, you can read those and hopefully get a better understanding. Okay, great. But let's take time for dinner now, and then I'll see you again at 7 for question and answer.
Meditation by day of beginning?
Yes. All right, please, you don't need to wait for me. You've done that before, it's very kind, but please. Otherwise I have to get up really quickly.